It's 1966 and Stanley Kubrick has a problem. He's halfway through filming 2001: A Space Odyssey and his production is spinning out of control, literally. The lights attached to his enormous centrifuge set are overheating and exploding. AI expert Marvin Minsky is nearly killed by a pipe wrench which falls from the turning centrifuge, missing him by inches. But right now, the incredible exploding centrifuge is the least of Kubrick's problems. For starters, nobody understands the story. There are huge chunks of script he doesn't know how to film. Worst of all, he's got aliens showing up in the third act, and he's racking his brains over how to film them without looking like corny movie aliens. So now Kubrick, the director's director, finds himself thinking, this might be my Waterloo. At the last possible moment, Kubrick figures out how to solve his problems, but his daring solutions confounded critics, enraged the studio, devastated his co-writer Arthur C. Clarke, and confused the hell out of people.
The opening of 2001 was very frightening. They didn't understand the film at all and left.
He told me that the first exhibitor screening of 2001 had, I believe he said, 241 walkouts.
The premiere of 2001 was an infamous shit show, but over time people came around to realizing that 2001 wasn't just a movie, it was a revolution.
This was a film that was imprinted on the consciousness of everyone who saw it.
It wasn't a movie. It was the first time that the motion picture form had been changed.
Somebody ran down the center aisle screaming, "It's God!"
We expected a lot from it, quite honestly. And in 2001, we got it.
When Kubrick first reached out to science fiction writer Arthur C. Clarke, he proposed they make the proverbial really good science fiction film because, according to Kubrick, there hadn't been any. Now, Clarke believed there had been a handful and suggested Kubrick check out 1936's Things to Come. Kubrick hated the movie so much, he told Clarke to never recommend another movie to him of any kind ever. Despite hating Clarke's taste in movies, Kubrick admired his writing, and particularly his science background. Before becoming a writer, Clarke was a scientist, and he proposed the concept of geostationary satellites, which I don't get, but which I'm told lay the foundation for today's satellite communications. Kubrick was impressed with Clarke's short story, The Sentinel, about explorers on the moon who find an ancient alien artifact. So Kubrick optioned The Sentinel and 6 other stories by Clarke to use as the basis for their film. The promise of the premise for 2001 was to make the audience a fly on the wall of a manned mission to Jupiter. But to pull that off, Kubrick needed to bring documentary realism to his space travelogue, which meant every detail had to be thoroughly researched and vetted by Kubrick himself. As you probably know, Kubrick was a perfectionist.
There were times he drove me crazy.
I love him one minute, and the next minute I hate him. I could kill him.
After working with Stanley on 2001, I swore I would never work for anybody again, because Stanley was a hell of a taskmaster.
He was ruthless in his pursuit of information from people or ideas from people, but professionally very, very focused on the best solution to whatever narrative problem that he's looking at, wherever that might come from.
As sets were being built on the MGM lot in Boreham Wood, England, Kubrick devoted most of his time commanding the growing army of technicians, artists, scientific advisors, and aerospace experts brought in to work on the production. Principal photography began in December of 1964, and there were still large chunks of story that Kubrick was unsure about. Any other director would pause production and go away with the writer to resolve the story issues. This is standard movie-making procedure even back then. But that wasn't Kubrick's MO. He was okay going into a production on an extremely ambitious movie with a script that really wasn't ready, because at his heart, Kubrick was a gambler. In fact, after moving to Hollywood, Kubrick had supported his young family by hosting poker games for Hollywood hotshots and beating the pants off them. That's one of the many contradictions of Kubrick. For a shy, nebbishy kid from the Bronx, Kubrick had mad confidence. But according to Kubrick's wife, Christiane, behind the bluster, Stanley was privately panicked about 2001, afraid he didn't know how to solve some of the film's bigger story issues. Though 2001 is divided into 4 sections, the most memorable is the third, the Jupiter mission, about the conflict between the caretaker astronauts Dave Bowman and Frank Poole and HAL 9000, the artificial intelligence which controls the onboard systems. In the shooting script, the conflict between HAL and the ship's caretakers comes about in a manner quite different from the finished film. In the original shooting script, it's Mission Control on Earth who figure out HAL is buggy. They alert Bowman and Poole to the issue and suggest that they might have to decommission HAL. HAL overhears this conversation and decides to take preemptive measures and kill Bowman and Poole before they might kill him. Now, this is how the storyline was written in the script, but It's pretty weak, and I'll tell you why. It makes the heroes, Poole and Bowman, passive, and it makes Hal's discovery of the plot against him weak and coincidental. Gary Lockwood, who played Poole, was troubled by this issue in the script, but as an actor, he didn't want to overstep and risk getting fired by pointing out this script mistake to Kubrick, so he kept his mouth shut. But the funny thing about Kubrick is that for all his dictatorial tendencies, he was apparently incredibly intuitive and open to criticism. In fact, he welcomed it. While shooting, Kubrick could tell Lockwood was troubled by something in the script, so he kept pressing him. Lockwood finally confessed his concern that this crucial plot point just didn't work. Kubrick, to his credit, wrapped production for the day and sent Lockwood, a deli lover, home with bagels and lox from the best deli in London. Kubrick said, "Gary, I don't want to hear from you again until you have the fix for this problem." Can you imagine the world's greatest auteur empowering a relatively unknown actor to fix a major story problem? But that was the conundrum of Kubrick, a micromanaging control freak who empowered his collaborators. And Lockwood, in fact, went away and came up with a brilliant fix. What if Dave and Frank, after hearing from Mission Control about Hal, elect to have a private conversation about Hal?
Oh, Frank, I'm having a bit of trouble with my transmitter and C-pod. I wonder if you'd come down and take a look at it with me.
Sure.
See you later, Hal.
They climb into one of the pods and kill the radio so Hal can't eavesdrop.
I've got a bad feeling about him.
You do?
Yeah, definitely. There isn't a single aspect of ship operations that's not under his control. If he were proven to be malfunctioning, I wouldn't see how we'd have any choice but disconnection.
What they don't know is that Hal can read lips, and that's how Hal discovers the plot against him. The genius of Lockwood's solution is that it puts us in Hal's shoes. We subjectively feel Hal's paranoia and empathize with him as he discovers his human friends who he really likes are plotting to kill him. Thanks to Lockwood, Kubrick now had the fix for one of the biggest story problems in 2001, but there were more problems to solve, and they had to do with the aliens. Through tireless experimentation and innovation, Kubrick's special effects team was able to figure out how to convincingly photograph space travel.
It's hard to realize that when we made that film, we didn't know what the Earth looked like from space, from any real distance. All these things had to be imagined.
This was all done in camera with lights and models, and 56 years later, it still looks amazing. But what they never cracked was how to convincingly photograph aliens, and that was one of the key drivers behind his decision to duck the issue altogether by making the aliens invisible. On casual viewing, it would seem that the monoliths are the aliens, but the monoliths are not aliens. They are an educational tool provided by them. Modern viewers will see the monolith as a prescient precursor to the iPhone. It certainly looks like one. But the monolith is more like a flat-screen TV turned on its side, and there's a reason for that. The monolith was intended to be a screen onto which the aliens would project movies we humans needed to see to develop to our next stage, kind of like a prehistoric Blue's Clues. But as production wrapped and Kubrick starts to edit, he's starting to question this choice. He's sitting there in the editing bay and he's thinking that showing an educational movie to a hominid is kind of goofy. Kubrick's solution was to concentrate on the spellbound faces of those confronting the monolith, on the hypnotic quality of what they were staring at without showing us the lesson. From a storytelling perspective, it's much stronger that we don't know what the monolith is communicating. Kubrick was right. Kubrick's solution of not showing the movies and leaving it to the imagination of the audience relies on the concept of negative space. The idea behind negative space is that you create a gap in the story puzzle, and the audience will complete it for themselves. Because stories are puzzles, and humans are compelled to solve puzzles. We can't help it. We just have to do it. So what you take away, the audience will fill in. This is a powerful lesson for screenwriters and filmmakers. Kubrick discovered that by removing the message from the monolith, he added a layer of myth and mystery. Inspired, he applied the same philosophy of negative space to other parts of the film and began cutting ruthlessly. Kubrick excised a 20-minute talking head prologue that his scientific advisors thought was absolutely essential. But co-writer Arthur C. Clarke reassured everybody there'd still be the lengthy voiceover he'd written, bridging narrative gaps, explaining key concepts, and eliminating any chance of audience confusion. Cut to the film's premiere in April 1968. This is without a doubt the most eagerly anticipated movie of the 1960s. But as the film begins, a confused silence falls over the crowd. The movie begins with apes for 20 minutes, and people really don't know what the fuck is going on. Nobody talks in this movie until 30 minutes into it. And then at the end, there is a 30-minute ending with Bowman going through a Stargate, which nobody understands. And then he winds up in some space hotel and then appears to change into a giant space fetus. Now, in the script, there was voiceover explaining everything. And with the voiceover, this really crazy story makes perfect logical sense. But at the screening, there was no voiceover because, unbeknownst to everyone, Kubrick cut the voiceover. Every last word of it gone. So the audience has no idea what the fuck is going on in this movie.
We had all the executives sitting in the audience, very old, many of them, and they didn't understand the film at all and left, whole rows of them, and we were panic-stricken.
The studio execs are furious. They feel like they just flushed $10 million down the toilet. Worst of all, Kubrick's close friend and co-writer Arthur C. Clarke is gobsmacked. He storms out of the theater at the intermission without saying a word to Kubrick. The first screening of 2001 is, by all accounts, a shit show of biblical proportions.
And then there was an enormous, catastrophic meeting in our hotel room. And Stanley was so upset he lost his voice. We were up all night.
Everyone is yelling at Kubrick to please fix this movie. His reaction? He cuts 20 minutes of footage. As for the voiceover that everyone is begging him to restore, Kubrick sticks to his guns and refuses to put it back in. Such was his clout at that time that MGM has no choice but to release the film as Kubrick wants it.
Stanley he was so independent by that time. If they wanted Stanley Kubrick to do a film, he did it his way.
Because he was accredited as a genius filmmaker whose movies made money, he was allowed a certain kind of latitude.
Kubrick's track record up until that point was undeniable. Spartacus, which he'd been brought in to save, turned out to be a blockbuster. Dr. Strangelove, the film preceding this one, was a massive critical and commercial success. So MGM decided to bet on Kubrick. But the early reviews were not encouraging. Renata Adler of the New York Times said the film was somewhere between hypnotic and immensely boring. Pauline Kael, the leading critic of the time, said 2001 was monumentally unimaginative. Andrew Saris of the Village Voice called it a thoroughly uninteresting failure. The reviews were harsh, and older audiences just didn't get it. But younger audiences started to flock to it. Now, Kubrick himself never smoked a joint or dropped acid, but his audiences sure as fuck did, and they found this movie a transforming experience.
I am told that during a year-long run of that film in San Francisco, that at some matinee, somebody ran down the center aisle screaming, "It's God! It's God!" and jumped right up on the stage and ran through the screen.
2001 caught on like wildfire amongst anyone under the age of 30. Kubrick's friend and co-writer Arthur C. Clarke got over his anger and over time came to truly embrace the movie's mystery and mythical resonance.
Stanley wanted to create a myth, and I think he succeeded. A myth should contain all sorts of levels, and different people should have different interpretations, and that, of course, is exactly what's happened. I mean, there's a whole literature about the meaning of 2001.
2001, as you probably know, went on to become a massive success and one of the most influential movies of all time. It remains, in my opinion, Kubrick's high watermark, and that's really saying something. For an entire generation of filmmakers that followed, 2001 became a benchmark for a new kind of cinema.
It's become clear that this is one of the seminal American movies. It was a battle cry for a generation.
It wasn't a movie. It was the first time that the motion picture form had been changed. It wasn't a documentary, and it wasn't a drama, and it wasn't really science fiction. It was more science eventuality.
To see somebody actually do it, to make a visual film, was hugely inspirational to me. If he did it, I can do it.
And we knew that when we went to see it, that it was extremely special and that we expected a lot from it, quite honestly. And in 2001, we got it.
I saw it in a cine club in Mexico. It was really one of those amazing experiences. It was unlike anything that I have ever seen. More than any other film, 2001 is the one in which he really found his real cinematic voice.
2001 is an experience that is purely cinematic, and which is why I think for a lot of filmmakers, it's like myself, it's sort of always stands up there as the kind of pinnacle of what movies can be.
If you like this video, be sure to like and subscribe for more high-quality videos about screenwriting, movie making, and the art of story. This is James Hurst for Screenwrite. Happy writing.